My family said my son's party was just for kids. When I refused to fund a venue for 17-year-old guests, they sent police, and I cut ties forever. I'll be honest, I never thought a kid's birthday could turn into a battlefield. For me, my son's birthdays were always about simple things: balloons taped to the wall, a cake from the local bakery, a couple of friends running through the house with too much sugar in their veins. That's it. Nothing Instagram-worthy, nothing staged, just genuine fun. My son was turning 12, and if you asked him what he wanted, the answer was ridiculously simple: pizza, video games, and his closest buddies sleeping over. He's not the type to ask for a concert hall or some DJ blasting music until midnight. He just wanted to laugh with his friends, maybe have a Nerf battle in the backyard, and eat more cake than anyone should. That's childhood. That's what it's supposed to be. But in my family, nothing is ever just simple. They always find a way to turn even the smallest event into some kind of production. A barbecue becomes a neighborhood spectacle. A Sunday lunch somehow turns into a 3-hour debate about who contributes more to family traditions. So when I mentioned we'd be hosting the party at our house, I should have expected the looks. Those tight-lipped smiles, followed by comments that sounded like jokes but weren't. Home party? For a 12-year-old? One of my relatives said over dinner. Isn't that too childish? I laughed it off at first. It's literally a child's birthday, I replied. But the silence that followed told me this was more than a passing remark. Here's the thing. My family has a habit of confusing their expectations with my responsibilities. To them, appearances matter more than authenticity. They want parties that can be photographed, posted, and bragged about later. They want to feel important in someone else's milestone. And if you don't give them that, they act like you've personally insulted them. At first, it was subtle. Oh, maybe he'd like a bigger space. Or don't you think teenagers would get bored at a house party? But slowly, the pressure crept in. They started suggesting venues, DJs, catering. All for a 12-year-old boy who just wanted pepperoni pizza and a couple of friends from school. I tried to stay polite, tried to explain. Look, this party is for him, not for anyone else. But my words slid off like oil on water. They nodded, they smiled, and then they went right back to pushing their own idea. And here's the detail that stung. They weren't even thinking about my son's actual friends. They were talking about their own teenage kids, 17-year-olds, who had no interest in hanging out with 12-year-olds. That's when I felt the shift. This wasn't about celebrating my boy. This was about them creating a free venue for their teenagers to have a night out on my dime. I should have seen it sooner. The way they whispered in corners, the way one of them texted furiously while glancing at me. At that moment, it was just background noise, little warning signs I ignored. I thought I was planning a birthday. What I was really stepping into was a family ambush. The real break came one Sunday afternoon, about 2 weeks before the party. I had invited a few relatives over for lunch. Nothing formal, just pasta, salad, the usual. I figured we'd catch up, maybe talk about schedules for the birthday, who was bringing what. Instead, the meal turned into a tribunal. It started harmless. My aunt leaned back in her chair, twirling her fork, and asked, "So, have you booked the venue yet?" I frowned. Venue? No, it's at the house. Like always. The silence that followed was heavy, like I'd confessed to something shameful. Then came the smirks. My cousin, who never misses a chance to act superior, raised an eyebrow and said, "You're really gonna make us sit around a living room like we're in kindergarten?" My son was in the next room, playing on his console. I could hear the faint laughter from him and his friend, the sound of digital chaos echoing through the walls. And here were these grown adults acting like a home party was beneath them. I tried to keep it calm. It's his 12th birthday, not a prom. He just wants to hang out with his friends. That's all. But they wouldn't let it go. One of them pulled out a phone, scrolling through photos of a fancy hall they had used for another event. "Look at this place," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Big dance floor, lights, a DJ setup. The kids would love it." The kids? I repeated. "You mean the 17-year-olds? Because my son's friends are 12. They don't care about DJs. They care about pizza rolls and Mario Kart." That's when the gloves came off. My uncle slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone. "Stop being selfish. You know how embarrassing it is when our kids go to school and say they had to spend Saturday at a little kid's party? Do you have any idea how we look as parents?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't even trying to disguise it anymore. This wasn't about my son. It was about their reputations. I said, slowly. It's not your party. It's not your money. And it's not your kid. The air got sharp after that. My aunt muttered something about me being cheap. My cousin snorted and said, God, you're so controlling. It's always your way. That word, controlling, stuck in my throat like glass. Here I was, just trying to protect my son's birthday from being hijacked, and somehow I was the dictator. The conversation ended with one last jab. Fine, do what you want. But don't expect us to show up if you're going to treat teenagers like toddlers. I watched them gather their coats and storm out, muttering to each other about family obligations and how hard it is to deal with stubborn people. And for a second, I almost felt relieved. If they didn't come, maybe my son would finally have the quiet, simple party he wanted. But that was just the beginning. For a couple of days after that showdown, the house felt lighter. No tense phone calls, no snide remarks, no guilt trips. My son was buzzing with excitement, drawing up his own little guest list, asking me if we could order extra breadsticks because Tim eats like 3 boxes by himself. It felt normal again, the way birthdays should feel. Then the messages started trickling in. First it was my sister. A casual text. So, did you reconsider the haul? Everyone's expecting something bigger. I ignored it. An hour later, another ping. You don't want him to feel embarrassed, do you? Embarrassed? My son didn't even know this conversation was happening. He was sitting on the couch at that exact moment, laughing with a mouthful of popcorn, watching some goofy YouTube video. The only people embarrassed were the adults who apparently couldn't handle a 12-year-old's party being for 12-year-olds. I let it go, until I accidentally overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I'd gone to pick up my jacket from the hallway closet during a family drop-in visit. Voices carried from the kitchen, low, sharp, like conspirators planning a heist. He's being ridiculous, one voice said. We can't let the kids show up to that joke of a party, another answered. Then laughter, bitter and short. Imagine telling people we spent Saturday sitting around eating pizza with children. He's humiliating us. I froze, hand still on the closet door. Humiliating them? I almost wanted to laugh. How did protecting my son's wishes turn into an attack on their social standing? The worst part was hearing the last line before I stepped away. If he won't pay, we'll find a way to make him. My stomach nodded. This wasn't just family nagging anymore. It was plotting. Later that evening, I confronted one of them directly. I tried to stay calm. Look, I don't understand why this is such a big deal. He's turning 12, not 21. He wants his friends here, in his home. Why can't that be enough? The response was a dismissive shrug. Because it's embarrassing. Because people will talk. You're too stubborn to see that. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Too stubborn? No. I was the only one actually listening to the birthday boy. That night, I sat at the dining table long after my son went to bed, scrolling through the group chat my relatives had set up. Photos of banquet halls, screenshots of DJs, even sample menus were being thrown around like it was some wedding planning committee. And in the middle of it all, a message highlighted in bold caps. He needs to pay his share, or this doesn't happen. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to just fade away. They weren't dropping it. They weren't going to respect boundaries. They had already decided the party wasn't mine, or my son's, to control. And I had no idea how far they were willing to go to prove it. It was a Wednesday night when the tension finally broke through the walls of pretense. I had just come home from work, loosened my tie, and was halfway through heating leftovers when the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch were 3 of my relatives, the self-appointed committee. They didn't bother with small talk. We need to talk, one of them said, brushing past me like she owned the place. I closed the door and followed them into the living room. My son was upstairs, probably glued to his PlayStation, thankfully unaware. The 3 of them sat on my couch, arms folded, jaws set. It felt less like family and more like creditors coming to collect. One of them started, so, we've all decided that keeping the party at the house is unacceptable. It's embarrassing, it's childish, and frankly, it reflects poorly on everyone. Everyone. I repeated. Or just you. They ignored the jab. My cousin leaned forward, elbows on her knees. We already looked into it. There's a hall available. Big enough for both the younger kids and the teens. We even talked to a DJ who'll give us a discount. All you have to do is put down the deposit. I almost laughed. All I have to do. As if writing a check for a few $1,000s was nothing. No, I said flatly. The party is staying here. It's what my son wants. This isn't up for debate. The room crackled with hostility. My aunt's face twisted. Do you understand how selfish you sound? He's 12. He won't even remember this party in a few years. But our kids will. They'll remember being forced to spend their weekend in a glorified daycare. You're ruining it for everyone. My hands curled into fists on my lap. The nerve of it, telling me my son's own birthday didn't matter, while demanding I bankroll a teen hangout disguised as his celebration. I tried to stay calm, but my voice sharpened. He will remember it. He'll remember being surrounded by friends who care about him, not shoved aside so 17-year-olds can have their Instagram moment. They exchanged looks, that silent communication families have when they're uniting against an outsider. And then came the threat, the one that turned my irritation into something colder. If you don't pay for the hall, we won't bring our kids. None of them. Your son will be humiliated when half his family doesn't show. Do you want that for him? I swear, in that moment, something in me snapped. Not with anger, with clarity. I could see it so clearly now. This wasn't negotiation. It was blackmail. I leaned back, folded my arms, and let the silence stretch until they shifted uncomfortably. Then I said, if that's your choice, fine. Don't come. I'd rather my son have 5 genuine guests than 20 who are forced to be here under protest. Their eyes widened, like they hadn't expected me to call the bluff. One of them muttered, unbelievable. Another hissed, you're tearing this family apart. I almost laughed again. Me? I was the one defending a child's right to have his birthday on his own terms. They were the ones weaponizing attendance. Just then, my son patted down the stairs, holding his controller. He looked between us, sensing the tension. Dad? Everything okay? The relatives plastered on fake smiles. Of course, sweetie, my aunt cooed. We're just helping your dad plan the best party ever. The lie burned in my ears. My son tilted his head, uncertain. Kids may not grasp every nuance, but they know when adults are being fake. He lingered for a second, then went back upstairs, quieter than before. And that cut me deeper than anything they said. Because for the first time, he felt the weight of their war, and it was crushing the excitement he'd carried all week. After they left, slamming the door behind them, I went upstairs to check on him. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed, game paused, eyes down. Dad, is it true? They don't want to come. I sat beside him, swallowing hard. They're making their own choices, buddy. But I promise you, your party is still happening. And it's going to be exactly what you wanted. He nodded slowly, but I could see the uncertainty flickering in his eyes. He was old enough to sense betrayal, even if he didn't fully understand it. As I tucked him in that night, one thought wouldn't leave me. They were willing to make him collateral damage just to get their way. And I had a sinking feeling they weren't finished yet. I thought maybe the ultimatum would be the peak of their nonsense. That after throwing their threats on the table, they'd sulk for a while and eventually drop it. But I underestimated just how far my family was willing to push. It started with a casual slip. My son came running into the kitchen one afternoon, waving his phone. Dad, why is Mark asking me if there's going to be a DJ at my party? I froze mid-stir, spoon dangling over the pot of pasta. DJ? Who told him that? He shrugged. He said his older brother heard it from my cousins. I kept my face neutral for his sake, but inside, my chest tightened. That could only mean one thing. They'd started spreading the word. Not just to their kids, but to friends of their kids. Teenagers who had no connection to my son, no reason to be there. I checked my phone later that night, and sure enough, in the family group chat, someone had posted, "Party confirmed. Big night for the teens too. Everyone invited." Complete with emojis and a blurry flyer-style image they'd thrown together. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was hijacking. I scrolled further and saw messages about who's bringing the booze and don't forget the speaker system. My blood went cold. They weren't planning a birthday. They were planning a teenage rager, under my roof, under my son's name. I sat there, phone glowing in the dark, jaw locked. The betrayal burned hotter than any insult they'd thrown at me to my face. Because they weren't only disregarding me now, they were erasing my son completely. His day had become their excuse. The next morning, I confronted my sister directly. Why are people saying my son's party has a DJ? And why are there 17-year-olds talking about alcohol? She blinked at me with that smug, practiced innocence. Oh, don't overreact. It's just a bit of fun. Kids grow up fast. You don't want your boy left behind, do you? My voice dropped. He's 12. He's not supposed to keep up with teenagers sneaking vodka. Her expression hardened. Look, it's happening. You can either accept it and avoid the drama, or keep making it difficult for everyone. That was the moment the last pieces clicked into place. They had no intention of respecting my boundaries. They had already committed, already spun the story to their kids, already painted me as the villain if I didn't comply. I walked away before my anger boiled over. But inside, something shifted. I wasn't questioning myself anymore. I wasn't doubting if I was being too rigid or cheap. No, this was about protecting my son from being shoved aside in his own home. And as I looked at his half-finished birthday banner taped to the wall, crooked letters, messy handwriting, I swore to myself, I would not let them steal this from him. This wasn't about if I'd fight back. The only question left was how. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at the banner my son had half-colored and taped to the wall. The house hummed with normal life. The heater clicked, a neighbor's lawnmower droned in the distance. And inside that ordinary noise, my brain was anything but calm. There's a strange clarity that comes when someone tries to make your child collateral damage. It isn't loud or emotional at first. It's a cold, precise calculation. You don't feel like shouting, you feel like planning. What will actually hurt them the most? Expose their motives, protect my son, or both? My first instinct was to call them out in front of everyone and let whatever shame came fall where it would. But I'd seen how that played out. Theatrics, more gaslighting, and my boy watching grown-ups perform for attention. That wasn't a victory. That was another wound. So I started listing options, methodically. Refuse them attendance and risk turning my son's celebration into a smaller, purer memory, but also risk making the kid notice who chose sides. Pay for the hall and surrender the narrative, letting them teach their kids that pressure pays off. Call them out publicly and make it messy forever. Or find proof, texts, messages, the flyer, and use it where it mattered. Not to humiliate my family for fun, but to make an official record, to stop the narrative that I was the unreasonable one. Beneath each choice, another truth settled in. This wasn't just about pride. It was about boundaries. If I let them win because they threatened my son's feeling of embarrassment, they'd learn that coercion works. If I folded, I'd be teaching my son how to give in. If I fought without a plan, I'd hand them ammunition. So I did what felt most like me. I went quiet and organized. I documented conversations, saved screenshots, and muted the group chat while keeping a log. I texted my son a simple line, "Whatever happens, your day is for you." He replied with a heart emoji and a GIF, small, trusting things that made the planning feel necessary, not personal. I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I wanted to protect two things, my son's birthday and the lesson he would take from it about who we were as a family. And suddenly, the path forward felt less like a gamble and more like a choice. The following Saturday, I decided it was time to put an end to the whispers and side plots. I called a family meeting. No surprises, no drop-ins. I invited them directly, told them to come to the house if they wanted to talk about the party. Part of me hoped they'd refuse, that they'd stay sulking in their group chat. But right on time, they showed up, carrying that air of smug expectation, as if I'd finally come to my senses. We sat around the living room. My son was at a friend's house, which gave me space to be blunt without worrying about him overhearing. I didn't waste time. "Here's the deal," I said, leaning forward. "The party stays here, at the house, with his friends. No DJ, no venue, no alcohol, no teenagers who aren't invited. If that doesn't work for you, don't come." But this isn't changing. The silence stretched, thick and hostile. Then my cousin scoffed, arms crossed. "You're making a mistake. He's going to resent you when he realizes what kind of party he could have had." I didn't flinch. He already told me what kind of party he wants. And it doesn't involve impressing you. That landed harder than I expected. My aunt shifted in her seat, muttering, "So this is final?" "Yes," I said. "Final. I'm done arguing." The room buzzed with the quiet of people who realized their bluff wasn't working. For once, I felt the ground under me solidify. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was simply stating fact. They tried one more jab. Fine, but don't expect us to lift a finger to help, as if their absence was supposed to scare me. I shrugged. "Then don't. I'll handle it." For a moment, I thought that was it. They stood up, muttering, slamming the door on their way out. I exhaled, tension bleeding out of my shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, they'd back off now that I'd drawn a line. That night, I ordered decorations online with my son, letting him pick goofy balloons and themed paper plates. He was grinning ear to ear, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe the storm had passed. But the relief didn't last. 2 days later, I got a call from another parent, the mother of one of my son's classmates. She sounded puzzled. "Hey, I just wanted to check. My daughter got an invite from your niece. It said the party would be at a hall downtown. Is that right?" My chest went tight. They were still at it. Even after my ultimatum, they were spreading their version of the event like nothing I'd said mattered. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there with the phone in my hand. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe I'd overestimated them, that once I said no, they'd listen. I couldn't have been more wrong. The day of the party finally came, and for a while it was everything my son had dreamed of. The living room was strung with messy streamers he'd insisted on hanging himself. The kitchen table was buried under pizza boxes and soda bottles. Laughter from a dozen 12-year-olds filled the house, bouncing off the walls like music. I watched him blow out his candles, cheeks red from grinning so hard, surrounded by kids who actually cared about being there. For the first time in weeks, the tension in my chest eased. The storm, I thought, was behind us. Even the family members who showed up seemed quieter, subdued. They sat in the corner, plastering polite smiles, scrolling on their phones, whispering to each other. But they didn't make a scene. No arguments, no demands. I let myself believe they had finally gotten the message. When my son opened his gifts and pulled out a goofy board game, the whole room erupted in cheers. He turned to me and whispered, "Best party ever, Dad." That moment alone made every argument worth it. I remember standing in the doorway later, paper plate in hand, watching the kids run around with balloons tied to their wrists. For once, the house looked exactly like it was supposed to. Messy, loud, happy. And I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I fought the battle, drew the line, and it worked. The calm was almost convincing. Too convincing. Because beneath the noise of laughter and the thump of Nerf guns hitting walls, I noticed something else. My phone buzzing nonstop in my pocket. Dozens of notifications from numbers I didn't recognize, all asking the same thing. "Where's the hall? We can't find it." My smile faded. The relief in my chest dissolved like smoke. The quiet, I realized, hadn't been surrender. It had been preparation. The storm wasn't over. It was just arriving late. The first knock on the door didn't bother me. I figured it was a late parent dropping off their kid, or maybe a neighbor annoyed at the noise. But when I opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their expressions flat and businesslike. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance," one of them said. Behind me, balloons bobbed in the draft of the open door, and the sound of kids shouting over a video game spilled out. I blinked, confused. Disturbance? This is a children's birthday party. The second officer shifted his weight. "We were informed there were underage guests being locked out, possibly alcohol involved. Can we step inside?" The words hit like ice water down my spine. I didn't need a translation. My family had actually called the police. I stepped aside, jaw clenched so tight it ached. The officers scanned the room. 12-year-olds in paper crowns, greasy pizza boxes, cakes smeared across plates. No alcohol, no locked doors, no teen guests. Just exactly what I'd said it would be. Still, the sight of 2 cops in uniform froze the energy in the room. The kids went quiet, wide-eyed. My son turned to me, face pale. "Dad, what's happening?" Before I could answer, my aunt materialized from the corner, suddenly louder and braver now that authority was in the room. "Officers, thank you for coming. We've been trying to tell him this isn't safe. There are supposed to be teenagers here. He locked them out. Can you believe that? He's humiliating them, and—" I cut her off, my voice low but sharp. "Stop." The officer held up a hand. "Let's keep this civil. Sir, are there additional guests?" "No," I said firmly. "Only those invited. Only 12-year-olds. You can see for yourself." But my relatives weren't done. My cousin piped up from the back. "Check the garage. That's where he's hiding the alcohol." The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so vile. I stared at them, a slow burn of rage rising. But outwardly I stayed composed. Because that's what they wanted. Me to snap, to look unstable in front of the police. "Go ahead," I told the officers, voice steady. "Check the garage. Check every room. There's nothing here but juice boxes and leftover cake." They did. 10 minutes later, they came back shaking their heads. "Nothing out of order. Looks like a normal birthday." But the damage was already done. Parents were whispering, kids asking questions. My son sat on the couch, shoulders hunched, looking like the world had just tilted sideways. He wasn't smiling anymore. That broke me more than anything else. Not the police at my door, not my family's lies, but the way my boy's joy drained out because adults decided his day was a stage for their ego. One officer, maybe sensing it, gave me a sympathetic nod. Sorry for the disruption. We have to respond when we get a call. Just try to keep the noise down. I walked them out, closed the door, and turned back to face the room. Half the kids were still giggling nervously. Kids bounced back fast, but my relatives stood there smug, as if they'd proved something by summoning authority. And that's when I realized this wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was sabotage. They wanted me cornered, humiliated, stripped of control in front of my son. But instead of rage, I felt something colder settle in. Because they didn't know what I'd been quietly collecting. Screenshots of their messages, copies of their fake party flyer, texts bragging about alcohol. They thought they'd exposed me. What they didn't realize was that they had just handed me the perfect moment to expose them. I looked across the room at their satisfied faces, then at my son's confused eyes. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with resolve. They thought they had escalated the game, but they hadn't seen the real ending I'd been saving. The hours after the police left dragged like wet cement. My son tried to smile through the rest of the party, but his spark was dimmed. He played the games, thanked his friends for the gifts, ate the cake. But the bounce in his step, the one he had just that morning, was gone. And I knew exactly why. Because when you're 12, and 2 cops show up at your house during your birthday, you don't forget that. You don't remember the pizza or the streamers. You remember the silence, the glances, the moment you feel like maybe you did something wrong, even when you didn't. That was their gift to him. Meanwhile, my relatives stayed just long enough to pretend they supported the event. They cleaned nothing, hovered with judgmental eyes, and whispered in corners. I caught one of them snapping photos near the trash pile, as if trying to document the failure of my party. It was grotesque, but I said nothing, because I was done reacting. Let them take their photos. Let them gossip. Let them believe I was the unstable one, the cheap one, the control freak who ruined the family dynamic. I let them build their case. Because while they were busy playing victims in a scene they had staged themselves, I was organizing the receipts. I had everything I needed. Screenshots of their group chat messages demanding I pay my share, or else they'd boycott. The fake party flyer one cousin had posted, complete with hall address and false schedule. Texts from other parents who'd been confused by mixed messages. And most damning of all, a video. My doorbell camera had caught the exact moment one of them told arriving guests that the real party was at another venue, a place that didn't exist. I watched that video twice. The smug tone in her voice, the fake concern. Oh no, didn't he tell you? He moved the party. But you can still make it to the other location if you hurry. It was deliberate. They'd try to steal attendance. Not just energy or mood, actual guests. That's when I felt it, the shift. I wasn't the overwhelmed father anymore. I was the calm witness. The one with the full record. The one they underestimated. I knew exactly what I'd do next. I'd waited long enough. I'd let them push, threaten, lie, even weaponize law enforcement. Now it was time to take the story out of their hands and put it into the right ones. They thought I was finished, but they had no idea how quiet power works. The next morning, I got up early. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens after an emotional storm. My son was still asleep, curled up with one of his new board games on the bed, a half-eaten slice of birthday cake on his nightstand. The sun filtered through the blinds, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel tension in my chest. I felt focus. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder I'd been quietly building, and began organizing everything. Screenshots, chat logs, photos, the video from the doorbell camera. I even transcribed a few of the voice notes that my cousin had sent to another relative, carelessly bragging about how he doesn't even realize we've taken over the party. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were invincible behind a shared last name. But the thing about lines is, once you cross them, especially when it comes to someone's kid, there's no walking back. Around noon, I sent out one message. Just one. To the entire family group chat. Since some of you feel comfortable using police resources and spreading false information about a child's birthday party, I've compiled everything and submitted it to the school board and local parent committee. I've also contacted legal counsel. Going forward, All communication will be documented. I'll be cutting ties permanently. If you'd like to see what was submitted, the folder is attached. And I dropped the Google Drive link. Then I muted the chat. I didn't stick around to read the responses, though I saw the notifications piling up within minutes. Panicked replies. Backpedaling. A few tried to deflect. This was just a misunderstanding. Or we didn't mean for the cops to actually show up. But others said nothing. Total silence. Cowards always retreat when the game turns. Later that week, I followed through. I met with a lawyer and explained the situation, not to sue anyone, but to get official documentation in place. I wanted a restraining clause drafted in case any of them tried to escalate. I filed a police statement noting the false report and misuse of emergency services. I also spoke with the school, calmly, professionally, not to shame anyone, just to set the record straight. And they listened. Several parents had already called about confusion around the party, and I gave them clarity. Complete, quiet clarity. My son's school counselor even reached out to thank me for how respectfully I handled it. She said most parents would have gone nuclear. I smiled and said nothing. And the relatives? They vanished. Vanished like smoke. No apology. No attempt to fix anything. Just gone. Some blocked me. Others ghosted. A few tried to reach out weeks later, not to apologize, but to move on. I declined. I told them they could move on all they wanted, but not with us. As for my son, I sat him down the day after everything blew up, told him some people in the family had made bad choices, and that we wouldn't be seeing them for a while. He nodded slowly, then surprised me with a question. Did I do something wrong? I looked him in the eyes and said, no, you did everything right. The party was awesome. I'm proud of you. He smiled, not the forced kind from yesterday, but a real one. And that's when I knew the damage hadn't reached him the way they wanted. They tried to hijack his birthday, his memory, his joy. They failed, because I stopped trying to be polite. I stopped negotiating with people who confuse entitlement with love. And when I drew the line, I didn't yell. I documented. I acted. They thought calling the cops would shame me. But the only thing they did was expose how far they'd fallen. And I made sure it would never happen again.